You are evolving into a crab. Well, probably not anytime soon, but this is real and probably the strangest phenomenon that's still happening today. Many animals in the wild that weren't. Crabs have now evolved into crabs. Take a look here. This is not a crab. This is not a crab either. In fact, nothing I'm showing you right now is a crab. They've all simply, over millions of years, slowly become more and more crab-like. This strange pattern has been studied so extensively that it even has its own scientific name, Karzinisierung, which, when translated from Latin roots, essentially means crabification. In other words, the tendency for things to turn into crabs. Of course, that sounds ridiculous, because it kind of is. But when we look closely at nature, we see this process happening again and again. Some species did it millions of years apart. Some evolved this way in completely different oceans. Some weren't even closely related at all. Yet they all ended up arriving at the same general shape. So, why does it seem like this is the ultimate life form for so many animals? What stops us from evolving into crabs next? And will all evolutionary roads always lead to crab? This crabification effect has become a running joke online, with countless memes about crabs being the pinnacle of all life. Strangely enough, science doesn't entirely disagree. In many environments, this body plan really is peak performance. To understand why, we need to look at a concept called convergent evolution. This happens when different organisms face similar challenges and independently evolve similar traits. For example, two completely unrelated squid species both evolved to become massive. Being large benefited them in similar ways, so evolution pushed them in the same direction. But why crabs? And why so often? To answer that, we first need to understand what crab-like actually means. Not everything that looks like a crab is a true crab. In fact, most crab-shaped animals are evolutionary imposters that simply ended up looking the part. A crab-like body is typically wide and flat, keeping the center of gravity low, and making the animal extremely stable. That flattened shape allows it to slip under rocks, hide in tight spaces, and resist being flipped over by waves or predators, which is critical because ending up upside down can be fatal. Crab bodies also come with a shell, but it's more than just armor. The entire body becomes a compact, reinforced structure, a living tank. When your whole form is essentially a shield, you're far more likely to survive than animals with long, exposed segments like lobsters or shrimp. Their short, powerful legs provide incredible control over movement. That's why crabs move the way they do, especially sideways. This sideways motion allows them to dodge threats while still facing their predator head-on. But this raises an important question. If the crab body plan is so effective, why didn't everything evolve into lobsters instead? Lobsters are strong, armored, and clearly successful. They've survived for millions of years, too. The difference is mechanical. Lobsters have long, segmented bodies with large tails, and that structure is difficult to modify. You can't flatten a lobster without breaking how its body works. Trying to tuck that long tail underneath would disrupt its entire anatomy. Crabs, on the other hand, start with a compact design that's easy to adjust. Their bodies can widen, shorten, armor up, or shift without losing functionality. Once an animal becomes crab-shaped, that form is incredibly stable, and species rarely stretch back out again. Reverting to a lobster-like form would require re-elongating the abdomen, restructuring muscles, reshaping tail fins, and reorganizing the entire body. Those changes are far more complex than simply shortening the body and tucking the tail. Karzinisierung is mechanically easy. Lobsterization is mechanically expensive. So, who was the first crab to become a crab? Technically, the earliest true crabs, known as the infrorder Brachyura, appeared over 200 million years ago, long before dinosaurs ever walked the earth. But they weren't alone. Around the same time, other crustaceans that weren't part of the crab family tree also began evolving into crab-shaped forms. We call Brachyura true crabs not because they were more authentic or biologically superior, but mostly because they were discovered first. Early scientists classified animals purely by appearance long before genetics or evolutionary history were understood. Flat, wide bodies, tucked-in tails, sideways walking. Those features became the definition of what a crab was. In that sense, these were the first animals we recognized as crabs, the originals, crabs themselves, which sounds really redundant, I know, but that actually highlights an important point. Even true crabs are included in the effect of carcinization. They didn't invent this body plan themselves. We simply labeled them as the official crabs after the fact. So, what other crabs are there that aren't actually real crabs? The most famous imposters are king crabs. Genetically, king crabs are actually giant hermit crabs that evolved away from the shell-carrying lifestyle. Their ancestors once lived inside snail shells, just like the small hermit crabs you see on beaches today. Over millions of years, they developed hardened bodies of their own, lost the need to swap shells, flattened out, widened, and gradually shifted into a crab-like form, because that shape worked better. Even though king crabs look far more similar to true crabs than they do to hermit crabs, they come from completely different branches of the crustacean family tree. Their last common ancestor wasn't a crab at all. It was some primitive crustacean that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. We can't say exactly what it looked like, but it definitely wasn't crab-shaped. Interestingly, anyone who's eaten king crab and regular crab often can usually tell the difference in taste, which makes sense, because they aren't the same animal. But king crabs aren't the only imposters. Take porcelain crabs, for example. And yes, the naming gets confusing here. Part of the problem is that when early scientists found animals that looked like crabs, they simply called them crabs. Those names stuck, even after we later learned they weren't true crabs at all. Porcelain crabs belong to the order Anomura, the same group as squat lobsters. They're actually very closely related to squat lobsters, just compressed into a crab-like shape. They don't fight like true crabs, and their shells are much more fragile, almost as if they're made of porcelain. Still, if you stumbled across one without knowing its history, calling it a crab would feel completely reasonable. What's even more fascinating is that carcinization occurred before true crabs even existed. Fossils like Eocarcinus and Eoprosopon show that crab-like body plans appeared long before modern crabs evolved. We see the same flat, wide bodies with tucked-in tails appearing again and again, almost as if evolution keeps reaching for the same solution. But if being a crab is such an ultimate life form, where are all those early crab-like creatures now? Most of them are extinct. The issue is that they weren't quite good enough at being crabs. Some lacked the hardened shells that true crabs eventually evolved. Others didn't have the leg structure needed for stable sideways movement. And some lived in environments that collapsed entirely during mass extinction events, like the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, which, to be fair, wasn't really their fault. Even so, evolution didn't abandon the design. It simply rebuilt it again later. Crab-shaped bodies are effective. And because of that, evolution keeps recreating them. The crabs alive today represent the most successful versions of this design so far. So, what else could, or will, turn into a crab? The unsettling answer is almost anything in the right environment. We've already seen multiple crustacean lineages drifting toward the crab shape. Some shrimp species are even showing early signs of flattening and tucking their tails, the very first steps on the long evolutionary road to becoming a crab. That said, this process mainly affects crustaceans. We're not going to see lions turning into crabs anytime soon. Their bodies are built for completely different environments. Humans, despite being the dominant species on the planet, are also extremely unlikely to evolve into crabs. You're safe for now. What is interesting, though, is that other animals have evolved similar shapes for similar reasons, even when they aren't crustaceans at all. Take stingrays. They aren't crabs, not even close, but they've developed wide, flattened bodies that serve a similar purpose. Crabs flatten out to stay stable on the seafloor, while stingrays flatten out to glide smoothly through the water with minimal drag. It's not carcinization, and it's not stingrayization either. It's simply evolution responding to physics. We see this kind of partial convergent evolution everywhere. Dolphins and sharks are a perfect example. Biologically, they couldn't be more different. Sharks are ancient fish with cartilage skeletons. Dolphins are warm-blooded mammals that breathe air and nurse their young. Yet, both evolved nearly identical streamlined bodies because that shape is the most efficient way to move quickly through water. If you want speed, stability, and low energy cost, evolution pushes you toward that same torpedo-like design. If you want to stay low and stable near the seafloor, you become flatter. Birds, bats, insects, even extinct reptiles, all independently arrived at wings because the physics of flight allows only a few designs that actually work. The environment limits the number of viable blueprints. It's not that everything is becoming a crab. It's that certain environments keep favoring the same highly effective shapes, and for crustaceans, that shape happens to be a crab. Non-crustaceans rarely fully crabify because they don't have the right starting blueprint. Crustaceans already have shells that can widen, tails that can tuck underneath, and legs that can shift sideways without breaking functionality. Other body plans don't have that flexibility. Karzinisation isn't a universal evolutionary destiny. It's a repeated outcome for a specific group of animals that are especially well-suited to becoming crabs. And as long as crustaceans exist, evolution will probably keep nudging them in that direction. Thank you for watching. And whatever you do, don't turn into a crab. Evolution is often described as creative, unpredictable, and endlessly diverse. Yet when biologists look closely at the history of life, a strange pattern keeps appearing again and again. Across millions of years in different oceans and from unrelated ancestors, nature keeps arriving at the same solution. Crabs, not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. Animals that were never crabs slowly reshape their bodies until they look, move, and function like crabs. This process is known as karzinisation, one of the clearest examples of convergent evolution ever observed. Karzinisation doesn't mean that all animals are becoming crabs. It means that under certain environmental pressures, evolution repeatedly favors a crab-like body plan because it works exceptionally well. To understand why, we first need to define what crab-like actually means. A crab-shaped body is wide, flat, and compact. The abdomen is shortened and folded underneath the body, rather than extending outward like a lobster's tail. This lowers the animal's center of gravity, making it harder to flip over and easier to stabilize on rough terrain like rocky seafloors or reef structures. This shape also allows crabs to slip into tight crevices, wedge themselves under rocks, and withstand strong currents. When waves crash or predators strike, a low, armored body survives far better than a long, exposed one. But the shell isn't just protection. It turns the entire animal into a single armored unit, a biological tank. Instead of defending only vital organs, the whole body becomes the defense. Then there's movement. Crabs have short, powerful legs positioned outward, allowing them to move sideways with precision and speed. This sideways motion isn't a weakness, it's an advantage. A crab can flee while still facing a predator, ready to defend itself with claws at any moment. Taken together, this body plan is incredibly stable, flexible, and energy efficient. And once an animal evolves into this form, it rarely evolves away from it. That's why evolution keeps returning to the crab shape. Interestingly, not all crabs are actually true crabs. True crabs belong to a group called Brachyura, which first appeared over 200 million years ago, long before dinosaurs dominated the land. But many animals we call crabs today don't belong to this group at all. King crabs, for example, are not true crabs. Genetically, they are closer to hermit crabs. Their ancestors once lived inside borrowed snail shells, just like modern hermit crabs. Over millions of years, they evolved a hardened body of their own, abandoned shell swapping, flattened their shape, and gradually transformed into something that looks almost identical to a true crab. This is karzinisation in action. Despite their appearance, king crabs and true crabs come from completely different branches of the crustacean family tree. Their similarity is not due to shared ancestry, but to shared evolutionary pressure. The same story appears again with porcelain crabs. Despite their name, they are more closely related to squat lobsters. They look like crabs, move like crabs, and live like crabs, but genetically they are imposters shaped by the same forces. Even fossils show that crab-like forms existed before true crabs ever appeared. Some ancient crustaceans independently evolved flattened bodies and tucked abdomens, only to go extinct later. Evolution didn't stop there, it simply rebuilt the design again. But if becoming a crab is so effective, why didn't everything become a lobster instead? Lobsters are successful, armored, and ancient. Yet their body plan is far more difficult to modify. A lobster's long, segmented abdomen and powerful tail are specialized for swimming. Trying to flatten that structure or tuck it underneath the body disrupts the entire system. The anatomy simply doesn't cooperate. Crabs, on the other hand, already start with a compact design that's easy to tweak. Shorten the abdomen, widen the shell, shift the legs. Mechanically, carcinization is easy. Lobsterization is not. That's why evolution repeatedly funnels certain crustaceans toward the crab shape, but rarely away from it. However, carcinization has limits. This process mostly affects crustaceans because their basic body structure allows it. Other animals may evolve shapes that look similar for similar reasons, but they aren't becoming crabs. Stingrays, for example, have wide, flattened bodies, not because they're turning into crabs, but because that shape works for life near the seafloor. Dolphins and sharks look similar not because they're related, but because hydrodynamics favors a streamlined form. These are all cases of convergent evolution driven by physics and environment. So no, humans are not evolving into crabs. Lions won't become crabs. Birds won't either. Carcinization is not an evolutionary destiny. It's a repeated outcome within a specific group of animals that happen to have the right starting blueprint. In the end, evolution isn't endlessly creative. It's practical. When a body plan works exceptionally well, nature uses it again and again. For crustaceans living on the ocean floor, the crab isn't a joke. It's one of evolution's most successful designs. And as long as oceans exist, evolution will probably keep building crabs, whether we call them that or not. Long before humans ever walked the earth, before mammals ruled the land, and even before dinosaurs reached their peak, the oceans were already locked in a silent arms race. Predators were getting faster, shells were getting thicker, and survival depended on one thing: adaptation. Among the many creatures fighting for survival, early crustaceans faced a brutal reality. Long, exposed bodies were easy targets, soft abdomens were vulnerable, and creatures that couldn't hold their ground were simply eaten. That pressure shaped everything. Over millions of years, certain crustaceans began changing in subtle ways. Their bodies shortened, their abdomens tucked inward, their shells widened and hardened. Legs shifted outward for better balance. What emerged wasn't planned, but it was powerful. The crab body. This transformation didn't happen once. It happened again and again. Whenever crustaceans faced environments with strong currents, rocky terrain, tight hiding spaces, and relentless predators, evolution pushed them toward the same solution. A low, armored body that could survive impacts, resist flipping, and defend itself from multiple directions. Crabs didn't become successful because they were aggressive. They became successful because they were hard to kill. A crab doesn't need to outrun danger. It doesn't need to chase prey over long distances. It waits. It resists. It endures. That strategy turned out to be incredibly effective. During mass extinction events, when oceans changed temperature, chemistry, and oxygen levels, many long-bodied marine animals disappeared. But crab-like forms kept surviving. Their compact shape required less energy. Their shells provided protection in unstable environments. Their ability to hide made them resilient when ecosystems collapsed. Even when predators evolved stronger jaws, crabs responded with thicker armor. When environments became harsher, crabs adapted without needing to redesign their entire bodies. That flexibility is rare. Once evolution finds a structure that balances defense, movement, and efficiency, it tends to reuse it. That's why crab-like animals appear in shallow reefs, deep seas, polar waters, and tropical coastlines alike. Today, crabs occupy almost every marine environment imaginable. Some live in coral reefs. Some burrow into sand. Some crawl along the deep seafloor. A few even survive on land, carrying water in their gills to breathe air. Yet despite their success, crabs aren't perfect. Their hard shells limit growth, forcing them to molt, a moment of extreme vulnerability. Their sideways movement is efficient in tight spaces, but not ideal for long-distance travel. And their compact shape trades speed for stability. But evolution doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for good enough to survive, and the crab body is exactly that. Karzinisation isn't nature being repetitive for no reason. It's nature discovering over and over that in certain environments, this design works better than almost anything else. Crabs are not the final form of life. They are simply one of evolution's most reliable answers. As oceans continue to change and environments shift, evolution will keep experimenting. Some lineages will fail. Some will disappear. And some inevitably will flatten, armor up, and walk sideways into survival. Not because evolution wants crabs, but because sometimes becoming a crab is the smartest move life can make.